thoughts on the Iran situation, for what it's worth, from a Canadian who's never been to Iran. I have studied the history as much as I possibly can, and I'm continuing to do so. And I've been getting an education in the history of the Middle Eastern region in general that I was not privy to in previous years. And it's been quite a fascinating journey. Michael and I, on the Unslaved podcast, have been breaking down the whole history of something called Islamo-communism, which is very relevant to today's discussion. And if you're like, what the hell is that? Islamo-communism, or you could also, it's been told or called the Islamo-fascist alliance. Basically, there's a history of alliances that have taken place with the enemies of the West. And I believe there's bigger high table power brokers and hidden rulers behind the scenes, in a lot of aspects of this. But if we just start on the surface level, there was a very strategic set of alliances that took place between what to the public look like groups and ideologies that wouldn't gel normally. But the fact is that they did form these alliances, and I think a lot of these alliances happened in regards to the fact that it's the only way that the West and America could get taken out, was if they allied on that mission. They might all disagree on other things and might go back to warring with each other another day, but those that have deep-seated hatred of Western civilization and would like to all see their ideology, their cult ideology, dominate the world, those forces, while in competition with each other in one aspect, were willing to lay swords on the table together with the combined project of dismantling and destroying the West, because it was the biggest thing that was working against all of them. And so we're talking about the fascism, the communism, the Islamism, the Islamistism, you want to call it like that, the extreme radical jihadist Islam that is a very special blend of ancient cult ideology that is designed to light the fires of the human mind and spark eternal unrest, chaos, and war upon the earth, and is essentially an ancient death cult reborn. And this death cult has many tentacles and many different expressions, and it expresses itself differently in Islam than it may do in a fascist regime or a communist regime. But the goals are the same, the psychological blueprint is the same, the tactics are the same, the underlying root causal factors are the same, meaning deep-seated resentment, envy, and just pure hatred of everything that is not you. And those forces combined to attack the West in a multi-decade, if not multi-century project. And then we also had elements within the West, so behind our own gates, that betrayed us and worked in tandem with this agenda. So this would include those, your far left, your far right, your woke left, woke, what do you want to call it? Those enemies, the domestic enemies and the foreign enemies, working hand in glove at the behest and by way of the funding of the high tables, the real cults that run the shit, or at least are very much just trying to do so. You have that sort of hidden hand element. And now we can talk about Iran. If we don't at least start with that framework, and I don't have the time and all the tools to pull up all the screen shares and the evidence to show you all of that and justify that argument. I've done that in countless shows and presentations, and many other thinkers and writers and authors and people and average Joes and journalists have gone into elements of that. But I'm just giving you a quick little intro to how we can actually look at what's going on in Iran. The other piece we need to weave into this is an understanding of something that I don't understand what's going on in MAGA right now. The Make America Great Again movement, where everybody was in support of President Trump because he was fighting the enemy that all these different groups, even if they disagree on, let's say, the political right, all these different groups who agree, okay, we've got a common enemy. Yes, there was probably some alliances between these different regimes. They definitely want to take down America and the West, so we need a guy that's going to go in there with some balls and take these people on. We've got all this funding going on from people like the Soroses and the Bill Gates and other big corporations, and also special interest groups. You've got other countries. You got Qatar. You got Russia. You got Israel. You got Iran. You got North Korea, China. There's all these things happening all at once, and everybody was thinking about what's going on in America. And there's this sort of libertarian camp, which on one day, on one day of the week, I agree with a lot of their sentiments. I understand the sentiment of being anti-war. I understand the memory in the American mind of what went down during the Bush regimes and all of that, where those guys are deep state actors. Those people are the infiltration within the gates that I'm talking about. These guys are the Fabians put in place to bring about this. Basically, the ultimate goal was to spark off all these different age-old tribalistic wars, so that out of the ashes of those conflicts and all of that chaos, one ring could rule all of them. One group, one cult, one round table could rule the whole thing publicly. And Trump comes into the picture and just starts blasting holes into that agenda. And so, of course, he became the most attacked human being ever when it comes to a politician. And, the whole system had a complete meltdown over his presidency. And now we've got the supporters of President Trump are all fighting with each other. And it's because of what I'm talking about. You've got these guys that are old school anti-war. They actually have a lot in common with the Marxists, I just got to say. But anyways, they call themselves libertarians. And they have this idea, this sort of rose-colored idea that we should just not do any wars of any kind, and that should be what we do. And I mean, hey, that sounds lovely. Like, if we can do something to stop all wars, that would be great. I would love to live in a world without wars. But like always, there's this zero knowledge of human psychology, human history, and human behavior. There's zero knowledge of the territorial imperative. There's zero knowledge of the tribal rooting of consciousness within the human mind and in the psyche that's been studied and analyzed for over 100 years now. And we've got a track record. We even have a recent track record of human nature under certain conditions and how it operates. So basically what I'm getting at here is the root causes of what brings war into the world between different tribes, different groups of people. Now, I'm not here to solve war for humanity. I don't know the answer to that. What I'm here to tell you is I don't think there is an answer to that. There hasn't been in all of recorded history right up to this very nanosecond that I'm talking to you. There's missiles being launched back and forth. There's wars going on in Russia, Ukraine. There's wars going on in the Middle East. There's still all the civil unrest going on in places like Yemen and Syria and all that stuff, where all these Islamic regimes are all fighting it out. These mafias are all fighting it out with each other. So actually the world is nothing but war. There's even the war going on right now of the battle of ideas on the internet, on social media. That's a war. We're in a 5th generation war. Battle of information, battle of ideas, battle for consciousness, right? So if you look around, there's nothing but war happening. There's a war happening in your own body right now, in every organ of your body, on the surface of your skin. There's a war for your survival between you and the macrobes and the microbes and the bacterias. There's an inner war going on in the minds and hearts of every living human being, which eventually will boil up to the surface and express itself on the big social, political chessboard. And all the people that I'm talking about these different factions, these different high table mafias, these people are just trying to control a natural force that already is taking place, whether they exist or not. And they're just trying to get that mechanism that's built into human behavior. And we can argue how it got there, nature and nurture. It's probably a bit of both. But either way, here we are. And these are the people, these high table people, these cults, all they're trying to do is manage that for you so that they can achieve the desired result of their agenda by way of this natural tendency in humanity to war with itself. And if they can create and foment, the word foment, induce, trigger, encourage, entice, war, conflict, all that, this is how they survive. This is how tapeworms and all those microbes that are trying to attack your body, it's how they survive as well. They sort of trick the host into feeding it so that it creates the war, and then order out of chaos, it takes over from the natural organism. It's the same process. It's just happening in human consciousness across scales. Okay? So we need to understand this before we start getting all putting flowers in our hair and going up and let's stop all the wars. Everybody hates the warrior until there's an army at the gates ready to hack you to bits. And I don't think the Western mind, I was part of this. I didn't understand it until I spent 20 years looking at it. And even me, I've only seen it from a research perspective. But I've had enough of that experience to get that understanding of just how close the Western world is and has been to complete annihilation by these psychopathic forces that are both external and internal. We have stage 4 cancer, and we're desperately trying to find the Rick Simpson hemp oil or something to try to fix it, or whatever it is. We've tried the baking soda. We're at this point where we're trying all these different remedies because we've run out of options. And the only thing that is standing in the way of complete annihilation of the Western culture and the Western world is Trump. And you and everybody out there that's been fighting this fight on every level to try to save freedom and sanity and reason. It's not just freedom we're trying to save. We're trying to save reason. We're trying to save sanity. And there are people in the world that don't want that. They want to be stuck in the dark ages, and they want the rest of the world to be stuck in the dark ages along with them. We're dealing with ideologies that are convert or die cult ideologies. They are death cults masquerading as religion. I've said this over and over. We've said this on Unslaved. We've done the research. We've shown you the receipts. All of the major religious institutions have been captured. I'm talking at the top level. I'm not talking about every religious person out there. I'm not talking about every Muslim, every Jew, every Christian, every Buddhist. We're talking at the top level, the institutions, which means the people who write the script and the marching orders and, read the runes, so to speak, and read the scriptures and translate it for you. That's captured by these forces, by these macrobes, by this pestilence that is simply just a sickness that the human mind can get caught up with. Any one of us can get this type of mind virus, this mind sickness. It's very alluring, okay? And so what I really want to say here and make this point very clear is the divisions happening in this Make America Great Again movement are happening because there's a faction there. And I'm not going to name names in this one. You guys can figure it all out for yourselves. They are not understanding that this isn't just a problem in America. Like, draining a swamp and flushing out the deep state and getting rid of all these bad actors and corrupt politicians and all these things and all these pedos, and that can't happen if you only do it in America. This is something Trump would have been aware of, and I believe he is aware of. And the generals behind him, the real generals, and the people that are actually fighting to stop the decimation of America and the West. They know what I'm saying. They understand that, yes, the Bush regime, the Obama regime, the Clintons, all that foreign incursion into the Middle East, in one sense, there was justifications for some of it, or at least the arguments posed were, okay, makes some kind of sense. We got to stop the threat over there before it metastasizes over here. Makes sense. And then that got corrupted and just used as a sales pitch. And then we all know what really happened was a bunch of corrupt bullshit, because the deep state had control of all the buttons, switches, and levers of power in the government. And they had both right, left wings of politics captured. So, what do you do now with that? Well, now you have somebody new, a new sheriff in town. Trump is different. Trump era is different than Bush era. So stop comparing them and saying, look, you guys are going in and you're threatening Iran and everybody thinks it's going to be a war with Iran. First of all, it's not going to be a war with Iran, at least with what we know right now. I mean, the wind can change at any moment. But there's a difference between targeted strikes. Like, remember when Trump took out Soleimani? The same people were saying the same bullshit, that World War III is going to start. This is biblical revelation happening in front of our eyes. Trump is going to get us into World War III. This was coming from both the radical left Democrats and the woke right, libertarian, anti-war people, who on the surface pretend to be pro-Trump, pro-America, but then it's really interesting how we're starting to see who's who right now, isn't it? Now, I'm not saying that they're all paid agents. I don't know. They could just be, they have an idea in their head and they can't get around that. And that's why the trajectory of their thought is going in the direction that it is. And they're misreading this particular scenario. I don't know. Lots of speculation there. But there's something that is being missed here, which is that the deep state cannot be only flushed out in America. It has to be done worldwide. Because if you just, I mean, think about it. You're talking about, if you take the template of the mafia in New York, for example, and imagine New York is the world in this example. So you got to flush out the mafia in New York. You can't just go to one district in New York, one little area. You can't just go to the Bronx and flush out the mafia elements in the Bronx and think that you're going to shut down the entire mafia that runs all of New York just because you cut off one of their legs. That leg's going to grow back in a different way with different leaders over time, and they're just going to get right back to business. That's what a criminal enterprise is. It's a multi-headed hydra. It's multiple tentacles. So if there is a plan, and I believe there is a plan, I have for a while, and maybe I'm wrong, but it's always been my little pet theory that there is a plan of action going on by Trump and team and whoever's behind that. I believe it is to rescue and save America. I believe it is to rout out the corrupt deep state elements. And I believe that they know, and you should now know, that you can't only focus on America and feel secure moving forward for future generations when it comes to this deep state, Illuminati, whatever you want to call it, the round table, the criminal enterprise that has designs for world government and world dominion, the age-old desire of kings, okay? So if you're going to stop that, you have to find out where's the planning happening? Where's the funding happening? Where's the training happening? Where's the weapons being supplied? How's that all working? How does that criminal enterprise work? The average person doesn't know the ins and outs of any of this. And so that faction of MAGA right now that is freaking out about what's going on with Iran and Trump saying, hey, you must surrender. Trump is looking at this as just another Soleimani guy, that he's like, look, you're a massive threat to our ally, Israel, which is the only country in the Middle East surrounded by hostile Islamic forces that in any way espouses Western values. Israel is not perfect. Israel also has its own deep state corruption that needs to be flushed out, just like America. It's just funny that they get a special treatment by the world as opposed to other areas of the world that are far more corrupt. And so there's something bigger going on. And I think what we are seeing in the political world, the geopolitical world, is there were people that Trump proposed deals to. I think this was early on in his first presidency. It's possible that some of this even happened before he stepped into the picture, and that we're kind of watching a bit of a movie play out here. Okay, it's all real, but when I say movie, I mean it's pre-gamed. It's pre-gamed out. Okay? We're dealing with world-class strategists here. And so these guys made deals with Trump. Bibi made deals with Trump. The fucking King of England made deals with Trump. A lot of these people made deals with Trump, and then others did not. Others turned the deal down. Or others have made the deal and have since gone back on the deal. And there's a lot of this like stuff going on behind the scenes that nobody's considering at all, because we're not privy to it. It's not like I can sit here and easily pull up all the evidence for everything. It takes some time to actually come to this understanding of what's going on. And at the very least, you can still disagree with me on it. It's just, it's an interesting pet theory to just constantly see confirmation for, if you know what you're looking at. But so the way I'm thinking about this is, there's a faction of MAGA that gets it, and there's a faction of MAGA that doesn't. And the one that doesn't are the ones that don't understand that you don't just flush out the American deep state and remain completely isolationist in this type of battle. That age has come and gone. The world no longer operates like that, and hasn't operated like that since even before Trump was in. He's a product of his time. And what you're doing is you're taking a standard that applied to, say, the Bush era and the Saddam Hussein era, and you're applying it to the current era, which is retarded. That's a retarded position to be in. That's really stupid deductive reason. There's a lack of deductive reasoning going on there, because that's ridiculous. People are pulling up this tweet that Trump did in like 2019, where he's talking about how we should have never gone in the Middle East. It was a total disaster. And they're like, what happened to this guy? And I'm like, well, what happened to this guy was the deep state happened to that guy. Not that they got him and recruited him like these people, these paranoids constantly talk about. But that it's too far in the chat. It's too far in the movie now. That Bush era happened. There's events that took place that you can't just unwind that clock. And now we're on that trajectory. We're on that timeline. So Trump is in that timeline, looking back and regretting, go, yeah, we shouldn't have even gotten involved. He's right about that. Because he's talking in context of the way in which America went in and dealt with those problems. With like boots on the ground, full-scale invasions, because that just obviously padded the military-industrial complex pockets and the whole thing. We get it. Okay? We're not in disagreement that there was corruption there. But the difference is today is that now Trump has to take power after that all those decades of all that bullshit going on. And it's too late now. The cat's out of the bag. The operations are underway. The enemies of America are already thoroughly embedded behind American gates all over the U.S., in all the states. So it's a tinderbox that can go up at any moment. Civil war, with the right funding. Look what they're bringing pallets of bricks in again. You got Soros and all these guys funding all these far left pro-Palestinian protests and all this. Who, you know, what that is just a smoke and mirrors show so that they can bring in these extremists to wreak havoc on American streets. Anarchy 99, you know what I mean? So you can't put a previous measurement stick and measure the current time with it. Like, it's just stupid. So that's number one. Number two, there's this isolationist attitude that if we only fix what's going on in America and just get rid of like Nancy Pelosi and the deep state and Chuck Schumer and Biden and Obama, that'll just wrap it all up and America will go on into the golden age and the deep state will have been defeated and all that. And it's like, no. This is a multi-headed global infrastructure that America is only now waking up to the fact that they've been captured by it. Just like I'm here in Canada and we're figuring, oh, the same force also captured Canada. Big fucking surprise. And I got to tell the same shit to my Canadian brothers and sisters here to say, hey guys, you guys are so focused on Canadian politics and what's going on in Canadian politics, and you're operating from a mainstream media narrative of Canadian politics in most of your reasoning, and you're forgetting the big picture. Guys, we're no longer living in countries in the modern world the way our grandparents grew up in countries. You got these big corporatists, you got the technocracy, you got the high table, you got people pretending to be leaders of certain countries but are really secret handshaking assholes with this globalist deep state that don't recognize national sovereignty, don't recognize individual sovereignty. If they talk about it, it's just for the cameras. These are international globalists that want world power. They want to destroy the very idea of both the nation state and the individual. They must remove those two precepts of Western civilization if their enterprise of a global new world order system is to become a success. It's a 200-year plan minimum from what I've documented and what others have documented. So you don't just kick out a few corrupt Democrats and think you fixed the problem. You've got to go to the heart of it. And when we're talking about the particular wing of one of the factions that allied with the other factions to take down America and the West, which is this radical jihadist Islamic extreme cult ideology, death cult ideology, that is the ideology that captured Iran and turned it into one of the most brutal Islamic dictatorships the world has ever known, the hotbed of financing terrorism around the Middle East. It's like how we were talking about how Ukraine was one of the slush fund houses, and there's biolabs, and there's the Nazi Azov battalion factions in Ukraine, and there's all that kind of stuff. And there's two corrupt powers coming together. You got all the shit going on with Russia and the commies there. You know, it's a tangled mess that the average person can't even imagine, okay? But I think Trump and his team have imagined it. And they do know what's going on, at least to an extent. And they are working to unravel this. And it's not so easy. You don't just walk in and snap your fingers and sign a couple executive orders and take out a few bad actors and then you're hoping it's over. This is a well-entrenched enemy that is entrenched all over the Western world and in these major power centers. So they got to deal, think about it. You got to deal with the local problem, the infiltration from within, the deep state. You got to deal with the foreign entities that are little branches on that bigger tree in China, in Iran, in Russia, in Ukraine, in North Korea. Did I forget anybody? It's all over the bloody place, okay? You got to make sure America doesn't erupt into civil war because it's being financed. Like they want to ignite civil war. They have this whole time. So you got to hold that off, because that'll melt the entire place down and leave it vulnerable for the attacks by the terrorist cells that are already well embedded with their suitcase nukes and the whole thing all over the United States. So you got to move carefully. You wonder why Trump is treading so softly and speaking for the cameras and playing optics and playing this game of optics? It's to prevent mass civil unrest that would end up in the complete destruction of the whole thing. People have no idea what we're dealing with. They're so focused on the American deep state that they forget that that's just a wing. That's just a branch of a global deep state power that is far greater than just one nation. So when you say to me, no war, look, the point that Trump at this point in time is making is that we're not going to war. I'm not going into war with it. No, Israel doesn't own Trump. Trump owns Israel. He made the deal. That's what I think. I think you guys got it backwards. Everybody's like, Israel controls the U.S. Yeah, there's many countries and special interest group. Big Pharma runs more shit than Israel does in America. Qatar also has massive funding in America and influence, to the fact that they're flooding this extremist ideology into the West. And remember, it's a hydra, so you're getting in a little bit of this Islamism coming in. Look what they did to Britain. You're getting this wokeism, this Marxism, this radical ideology, and it's just, those are different types of warheads being launched into all the institutions in the West over a period of time. It's the long march through the institutions, these different factions allied with each other. And the reason Iran is so important, and by the way, if you go look at the Q posts, which if you get any stock into those, but they're becoming extremely interesting, go put Iran into, go to qalerts.app, go to the search and put in Iran and just read. Your mind's going to be blown. And I found this one post just out of interest that I find interesting, that was talking about, we're with Iran, watch what's going to happen to Iran, wonderful things are coming for Iran, we stand with the Iranian people, blah, 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 right? This is coming from clearly military people that were writing these posts. They know a hell of a lot more about what's going on in the Middle Eastern region than any of us average Joes. They have access to classified military intelligence that we've never seen before. President Trump has access to classified military intelligence on what's going on that we've never seen before. And yet everybody's an armchair expert. We're listening to bloody comedians right now. It's amazing. So this post is post 1943. Go look up post number 1943, and then go look up that year. What major historical World War II event took place in the year 1943? So the post 1943, that's the number of the post. They're all numbered. It's basically like a big index. Number 1943 just so happens to be talking about Tehran and Iran, and how, watch the amazing things that are going to happen in Iran. We're with Iran. We stand with these Persian people, or whatever it says. And then it's 1943, which is the year of the major meeting between Churchill, Stalin, and whoever the fuck that was. Which is giving me the indication, hey, should we look up how the mullahs and the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem were all chatting it up with the Nazi regime? And that the Nazi regime actually blasted, for years, blasted Nazi propaganda by way of these agreements with these muftis and these mullahs and these leaders, these Islamic leaders. They blasted their Nazi propaganda into these regions for decades. So you got the Nazi faction that has ties to Iran and the ties to the Islamic Brotherhood that took Iran over from the Shah and the king or whatever who's in exile. Was it 46 years ago? Turning it into a brutal dictatorship that the Iranian people are celebrating the Israeli strikes. And again, think of the Israel thing as Israel's not working on its own. Israel's working under Trump's direction, or at the very least under his influence, because of the deals that were signed. The deals signed by these leaders with Trump and his team to prevent the destruction of their countries. Because under the globalist regime, there wouldn't be a Vladimir Putin, there wouldn't be a Xi Jinping, there wouldn't be a Bibi, there wouldn't be a Trump, there wouldn't be any sovereign nations. You would have districts of the world government. And none of those guys wanted it. And Trump knows how to make deals, even with his enemies. So just as these factions I listed, Islamism, the extreme Islamism, the communists, the fascists, the socialists, right? Those alliances that took place that nobody can reconcile. How's the woke LGBT queers for Palestine hooking up with Islam, which would be like completely antithetical to its ideology? Why are they bed buddies? Well, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it makes sense when you understand that totalitarian types will bunk up together to take out a greater enemy, and then they'll go back to the little internecine battles later down the road. Well, it's the same kind of play happening on the white hat side with the guys trying to save the West, that are willing to make deals with their enemies to stop a greater White Walker type force. And then they'll go back to their battling about other things later. And I think Trump is thinking, hey, if we can fix some of these problems at the source without boots on the ground invasions like what Bush regime did, through targeted strikes like what he did to Soleimani and like what Israel did to the entire Iranian leadership. I think there's like, what, one or two guys left. They're all hiding out somewhere and they know exactly where they are. And now Trump is telling them, hey, unconditional surrender or we're coming for your ass. And this is making that other side of MAGA go, oh my God, he's going to be Bush era. Look, he's absorbed in the deep state. Israel runs him, blah, blah, blah. And this is just jump to conclusions, Matt, with possibly a little funding to help these influencers get their word out overnight to millions of people. This is all about fracturing a united movement to save America in MAGA. So don't fall for it. Israel doesn't run Trump and America. Trump and America has Israel by the balls. That's what's really going on. Without America, Israel is nothing. But Trump's goal would be to make Israel strong enough that it doesn't need America the way that it needs it right now for its survival. So that's one way to look at this. And then the Iranian strikes, well, if you know anything about the history, and it's a fascinating history, we did a good show on Unslaved called Iranian Leviathan with Jason Georgiani, breaking down that history, the fall of the Shah, the fact that 46 years ago, Iran was basically a secular country. Women, it was very Americanized. And then once the mullahs came in and the ayatollahs came in and whoever they are came in, the Islamic leadership, that whole thing fell apart, and then the brutal dictatorship began. And then also Iran became powerful enough to become a hotbed of terrorist funding. And the terrorist funding was for the purpose of assisting in taking down the great Satan, which is America, by not just the extreme radical Islamists, but also the other factions that allied with these extremists to take down a common enemy. So you can't just take them out in America. You got to go to the base of it all around the world. That's why this operation is taking so long. That's why a lot of shit doesn't make any sense unless you put this into your equation. And that's why these people pretending to be MAGA, who I don't think are, maybe never were, are missing the boat here, is that they are thinking purely isolationist with this old romantic idea of that America, when that's not the right context, because we're in a different era coming after the deep state swamp being the rulers of America. Now Trump's coming in. He's 6 months in or so, and he's trying to solve a lot of these problems. And one way to stop this constant threat of radical terrorism and extremism and this insanity, these revolutionary ideologies, you've got to take the head of the snake. And one of the heads of the snake is in Iran. And yes, you've got the deep state problems in Israel that I think are being dealt with. And the Israeli forces dealing with Hamas and dealing with Hezbollah. There's a unified front that's happening, while on the surface it looks like it's all just solo actors operating on their own whims. But it's not. This is a unified plan to stop the deep state and all these terror networks around the world, so we can make the world great again. Not under some totalitarian government, but to reinstall the main principles of freedom, individual rights. You have national boundaries for a reason. You have cultural identities for a reason. They should be celebrated. And so if you want to save those ideologies, you've got to take out the enemies, and you can't just flush them out, the ones that made it to the gates. You got to go to the source. Now, the way it's being done is totally different than before. The way it's being done is with targeted military strikes, with spycraft, with optics, with infiltration. They're using the deep state playbook on the deep state, on the global deep state. So just another way to look at it. If you're thinking purely isolationist, you're not going to understand what's going on right now. If you're understanding that that's not an appropriate mentality right now, maybe down the line, when all this shit's resolved, we can talk about whether America is going to be isolationist or not and not get into any foreign conflicts. Great. But people are like, why are we fighting for Iran? Why are we fighting for Israel? Why are we fighting for all these different countries? It's because the threat is worldwide by the same force that is basically a mishmash of alliances of forces that they have at least one thing in common, which is hatred of the West and hatred of America. So you're going to see some non-isolationist moves from the Trump administration, but what I don't think you're going to see is more wars being started by the Trump administration. I'm talking wars, boots on the ground, long drawn out conflicts like Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not what he's doing. He's doing targeted surgical strikes. And I think there's been a lot more of that than we know yet in order to flush out this swamp, this death cult that is worldwide. And that's the piece that these guys are missing. They're stuck in a romantic idea in their head. They're stuck on certain factoids that you hear them bring up all the time that are irrelevant to what we're talking about here. It's like I'm watching that Game of Thrones show where all those families and all those kingdoms are all fighting it out with each other, killing each other off, while there's a common threat of the White Walker force coming to the entire kingdom to wipe everybody out. Trump and his team see that White Walker force, and they know what it is, and they know how it operates, and they've stung that operation for a long time now. They've a lot of experience dealing with that. They know the intelligence that we don't know. And they're taking that on, and they're forming alliances themselves strategically on people who on one day might be an enemy, but on this day, they are an ally, because it's what's necessary to survive this war. And people that understand war and conflict will understand that it's not these easy idealistic decisions that you get to make. There's collateral damage. There's hard decisions that need to be made. There's optics that have to happen. There's deception that you need to play upon your enemy that is still active and running around rampant behind the doors of some of the most powerful intelligence agencies, military agencies, government agencies, corporate entities, private NGOs, all kinds of stuff going on. And there's probably even deeper layers behind that. This is a battle for the earth. This is a battle for the survival of the human species. That's what's at stake. So when you're stuck in local politics, I just think you're missing the boat. And if you're watching this conflict with Iran without the historical knowledge, without the knowledge of these alliances, how this multi-headed hydra really works, how the New World Order really works, the threat to the West from these radical forces, whether they be these radical communists, fascists, or these Islamists, or other whatever cultists, it's going to take a totally different way of seeing warfare, modern warfare, and our current situation than we've ever had before. So if you're looking at what's happening right now through the lens of your grandparents' view of the world, of like a 1993 view of the world, you're fucking off the table. You're not even part of the conversation. I'm sorry. You're just so behind. So behind. So it's time to get caught up. That's all I'm saying. Get caught up. There's a new sheriff in town who's operating completely differently. You can't take everything on face value. A lot of this shit is smoke and mirrors because the enemy is still active. Makes sense. And you're not going to stop the threats at home unless you realize the source of the threats are happening external to you and have been for a long time. It's just that the previous guys that came in, these neocons or whatever, these that was a totally different approach. Those forces were captured guys that were continuing the chess game of the deep state of the time and using some valid arguments to justify things that the public wasn't made aware of. And when the public finally became made aware of it, they got a bad taste in their mouth and they went, holy shit, we can't get involved in anything going in the Middle East. We need to completely seal ourselves off. It's the only way to stop the bleeding. I understand the sentiment, but it's a different chessboard right now. So maybe we can get back to it. But right now, the Iranian people are telling you what you need to know about what's going on. They are waiting to be liberated. They're going to see the return of a king. We're going to see the return of a king. It's probably going to happen soon. He's already addressing the nation. He's been in exile. This king has been in exile. And because of these Israeli strikes that are supported by Trump and his administration for tactical reasons in this greater war, you're going to see the liberation of the Iranian people after 46 years of a brutal, oppressive dictatorship that the average Western person has no idea in the world. I know this and I'm passionate about it because I have friends from Iran. And I've spent a lot of time listening to them, talking to them, studying this, reading the books, watching this stuff go on, and realizing what level of a threat we're facing if we just walk away and don't realize what's going on with the source of a lot of this radical terrorism that's being funneled. Look at Europe. Look what they've done to the UK. This is by design. And these Islamists don't even realize they're in the employ of higher forces themselves. These Templar forces and whatever's at the top of that. They don't realize that all those deals were made. They're just operating off their own agenda, and they're probably being pitched that, yeah, you can have America. Bullshit. It's just like what happens in communist dictatorships. You're useful pawns, and then you're the first people executed once you've ceased to prove any usefulness to the regime, the real regime. So everybody's being played right now, and not in the way you think. The deep state is being played. And my prediction is we're not going to see boots on the ground in Iran unless other things change. But that's not what I hear Trump saying. That's not even what Israel's saying. They didn't go in and just like drop one of their own nukes on Iran. They could have done that. Israel has nuclear capabilities. Israel could have turned Palestine into glass, and they could have turned Iran into glass. Why didn't they? They did targeted strikes because they knew Trump wouldn't let them do anything more than that. And that's strategically the best answer, is you take out the head of the snake. Then the little minions fall apart. You scatter their forces to the winds, and then, boom, you bring in, and everybody's like, well, what about all this regime change? Yeah, you want a regime change in Iran. Trust me. That's one you want. That's one you want. Who's funding the radical jihadists in your local neighborhood? Where's that coming from? And all this shit with all the wars going on with Israel, and that whole region could be a completely different place. The Middle East could be great again. That's what Trump wants. That's what Trump wants. He wants to do business over there. He wants it to be modernized. He wants the view of pre-Islamic takeover of Iran, the Persian culture, to be reinstalled again, because it's going to be more Western, more friendly to the West, more modern, and it's not going to tolerate any of these extreme radical death cults. That's what they're trying to build over there. They need to build that over there so that the shit stops happening with Israel. They need to rout out the deep state in Israel as well, the corrupt socialist forces that have corrupted its government. They need to rout it out in America. They need to rout it out in Canada. They need to rout it out everywhere. You think everything going on in Canada is all, you take what's going on the surface? Look at that Mark Carney with his posture and the way he's talking to Trump. Who's the daddy? Who's running the show? Canada's probably already the 51st state at this point. They're making strategic alliances between Western values versus the rest of the world's values. And it's, what kind of a world are we creating moving forward? Are we constantly going to be at war? How do you stop war? You stop war by getting rid of the terrorist networks that are precipitating war and the people funding and financing it and pushing it. You don't just stop war by, let's just not fight anymore. Let's lay down all of our arms and watch what happens as all of the embedded terrorist networks start burning the fucking place down, and then we just do nothing to stop it. Right? So anyways, just a whole other way of looking at it. This ain't the Bush regime. This is not the same thing. It's not going to be a boots on the ground war. We're not going to World War III. These guys have been calling for World War III every day of my life, and this hasn't kicked off. We're talking about asymmetric hot wars with nukes flying around. It just never kicked off because they're wrong in their geopolitical analysis. They're misreading the whole thing. So you got to get into the history of Islamo-communism, Islamo-fascism, that whole thing, the nexus, the deal, the alliances that were made. And right now, just, are you on the side of the West and the principles of freedom? Like, do you want all the women of the West wearing burqas? Do you want everybody to become radical communists and run by radical communist regimes? Do we want to be absorbed into a globalist deep state apparatus that is very anti-human, anti-freedom, and pro-human depopulation and complete central control and the micromanaging of every fine detail of your life? Or do we want to go with Western values of freedom, and do we understand the nature of the enemy we're facing and how they operate? So just some things to think about. You can be anti-war, I respect that, but it's viewing the world through the eyes of a child. We don't live on that rock. I don't know if you missed the memo on human psychology and human history, and I'd love to hear better solutions right now, honestly. Like, let's stop critiquing everything that people are doing that are well above your pay grade. Where's the solution? What would you do differently? You let these guys run riot in the street and keep killing innocent people and plotting to build destructive weapons that could completely end us? Or are we going to put an end to that regime, liberate the people in that area in the process, and then also be flushing this deep state out around the world? Because that's what it's going to take, guys. It's not just going to take flushing out one area. You're not just going to flush out the mafia in the Bronx and expect the rest of New York to become this beautiful, peaceful place. In that analogy, you need to do it a complete top-down purging and dismantling. So all I'm saying, I'm calling your mind to look at the greater war going on. Look at the 40,000-foot view. Don't get stuck in all these little skirmish battles going on the internet, mostly funded by bot accounts, people that are financed intelligence agents, people that are being paid by the enemies of the West. and they want to complete